Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I am your host, Shelley Pruitt, and I have here with me my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Mr. Ryan Roberts. How
Hello,
you
hello.
guys tonight?
Hi, I'm good.
We're good. I'm excited about this one. I've been waiting like all week with bated breath.
Yeah, I know a little bit of the story, but you have gone down all kinds of rabbit holes and have come up with a
Shelley's gone
interesting.
further down the rabbit holes.
Absolutely.
Well, the topic we're going to talk about tonight is about the missing Rockefeller, and that is Michael Rockefeller. And this is one that I have known the story for a long time, and he's one of my. I love anything that's an unsolved mystery that is truly unsolved and is likely never to be solved. I like the conspiracy theories. I like the theories and ideas of what might have happened. I like the conjecture and the discussion. And this is one that no matter which rabbit hole you run down, you might be right.
No.
So we are going to jump into the story of Michael Rockefeller.
Please do, because you've been teasing this for all week and I'm ready.
Mm-hmm.
I've been holding back.
Okay, I'm glad that you didn't go and look anything up. It'll be really interesting to see if I convey the story to you as correctly as I possibly can and that you understand it and stay with me. Now, to tell you about Michael Rockefeller, we have to go all the way back to his great grandfather, and that is John D. Rockefeller. And few names conjure up a vision of power and wealth like the name Rockefeller does. And this name indeed has power. It's alleged that John D. Rockefeller is one of the founding fathers of the Illuminati, and also that the Rockefellers is one of the 13 satanic bloodlines that controls religion and history via the New World Order. But this powerful
that's
man...
not what we're going to talk about tonight.
That is not what we're going to talk about tonight.
No.
But John D. Rockefeller had very humble beginnings. The story begins with John Davidson Rockefeller, born July 8th of 1839, to Eliza Davidson Rockefeller and William Big Bill Avery Rockefeller. John was the second of 6 children, and he was a traveling salesman. Well, he was a traveling physician and snake oil salesman. So he was a bit shady and familiar with the art of the con.
Just a bit.
And John,
yeah.
And John, being a very bright child, he had a knack for numbers and a strong instinct for business, even though he had dropped out of high school. In 1864, John married Laura Celeste Setti Spellman. She was a Ohio native whose father was a wealthy merchant, politician, and abolitionist active in the Underground Railroad. She's also the namesake for Spelman College, which is a historically Black women's college in Atlanta, Georgia, that her husband, John D. Rockefeller, helped to finance and begin.
Oh, wow.
Now, the couple had 5 children: John D. Rockefeller Jr., Edith, Elizabeth, Alta, and Alice. And between 1863 and 1865, John D. built his first oil refinery in Cleveland, Ohio. In 1870, John incorporated, and it became the Standard Oil Company. They quickly began to buy out all of their competition, and by 1872, almost all oil refineries in Cleveland were owned by Standard Oil. Now, by 1882, Standard Oil has a near monopoly on the oil business in the U.S. Of course, in 1890, Congress passed that little, Sherman Antitrust Act in an effort to combat monopolies because John D. Rockefeller was making crazy tons of money. And in 1892, the Ohio Supreme Court ruled that the Standard Oil Company was a monopoly and that it violated state antitrust laws, and they wanted it broken up. Well, shrewd businessman that he was, John D. Rockefeller sidesteps this decision by dissolving the trust and transferring the properties to companies in other states, most of whom were owned by his friends and business partners. Now, John helps to establish and found the Federal Reserve with the Rothschilds. And this is another one of those 13 bloodlines. And after 1897, John focuses on philanthropy, establishing educational institutions, including the University of Chicago, the Rockefeller University, the Rockefeller Foundation, and several other different charities. And at the time of his death on May 23rd of 1937, at 97 years of age, he had contributed more than $500 million to charity.
Jesus.
Man.
And that's in that time money, not
Mhm.
today. That's
Mhm.
good.
That's
Lord.
right.
The definition of
Now-
philanthropist.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, John Rockefeller Jr. was no slouch either. He graduated from Brown University and joined his father in business, but he focused more of his efforts on philanthropy. And in 1901, John Jr. married Abby Green Aldrich, the daughter of U.S. Senator Nelson Aldrich, and they had 6 children: Abby, John D. III, Nelson, Lawrence, Winthrop, and David. Abby and John Jr. were devoted to education and the arts and humanitarian causes, and they helped to establish the General Education Board. They funded the construction of the Rockefeller Center. They were instrumental in putting together the USO, which was the United Service Organization. They donated the land for the United Nations headquarters and donated $5 million for the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts.
I mean, did they do anything else that's notable? I mean, come on.
Yeah,
God.
actually, they helped to restore Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia.
Of course
And
they
they
did.
donated land to the construction of low rent housing for the poorer areas of New York City. They were also instrumental in funding the Museum of Modern Art, known to New Yorkers as MoMA. Now, their passions inspired their children, especially their son, Nelson. Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller believed in fate. He was born on July 8th in 1908. He shared his birthday with his larger-than-life grandfather, John D. It was a coincidence that he always considered to be a very good omen. He shared his grandfather's ambition and vision for greatness. And he had boundless energy. And with that kind of energy, he could make his dreams come true. But that was about as far as the similarities with his grandfather was going to go. Because you see, Nelson had decided that he was going to take the Rockefellers in a whole new direction. Until then, they had been an intensely private family that did their best to, let's say, control the narrative and the public persona of the Rockefeller name. But Nelson, he wanted to be popular and powerful and famous. He wanted to be the president of the United States. But fate, it turned out, would not oblige. Nelson took after his mother, Abby, who clearly favored him as her favorite child. He was strong-willed with an irrepressible temperament that would become his trademark. Even though he wasn't the oldest son, he was often leading his brothers in projects and activities. And Nelson had an enchanting charm and vitality that he clearly inherited from his mother. He and his father, John Jr., had a bit more of a strained relationship. John Jr. was a disciplinarian, and he believed in modesty and emphasized the fact that you should be cautious about steps that you took. And that just didn't seem to sit well with the couple's third child, Nelson. So Nelson Rockefeller, he always seemed to be in a hurry to do everything. A few days after graduating from Dartmouth in 1930, he married Mary Todd Hunter Clark on June 23rd of 1930. Then, very quickly, he had 5 children: Rodman in 1932, Anne in 1934, Stephen in 1936, and twins Michael and Mary in 1938.
Jesus.
Man, they were cranking them out.
Busy.
That's right. He was in a hurry to do everything. And every child, coincidentally, middle name was Clark. Mary Clark, Michael Clark, Stephen Clark, Anne Clark, Rodman Clark.
You serious, Clark?
All of the children had the middle name of Clark. Now, young Nelson Rockefeller was ambitious and complex, and he showed a leadership and management skill set that made him indispensable to his family and to the family ventures. In 1938, at age 29, he was named president of Rockefeller Center. But this restless ambition just consumed Nelson Rockefeller. And in 1940, he joined Roosevelt's administration as the head of a new agency for Latin American affairs. He stayed in Washington for the next 5 years, and he went back again in 1953, working on the foreign affairs and government reorganization and public policy under Presidents Truman and Eisenhower. Now, in 1958, he ran for governor of New York State. It was a massive campaign that he bankrolled with his legendary fortune. He was a confident and charming politician who was at his best when he was shaking hands and striking up one-on-one conversations. And yeah, he won. Well, Nelson got right to work. He began to change the face of New York State. He began a massive array of public works projects. He built low-income housing. He built schools, hospitals, roads, monuments. He established the state university system, which is known as SUNY, S-U-N-Y, and a modern highway system that went throughout the state of New York. He dove headfirst into his own brand of gubernatorial activism. And he spent the taxpayers' money pretty liberally. But his love of art that had been fostered by his mother never left Nelson Rockefeller. And in 1939, Nelson had been named president and on the board of trustees for the Museum of Modern Art. He utilized his travels to procure new items for the museum. On a trip to Sumatra, he purchased a knife, but not just any knife. It had a sculpted head on the hilt, and it was adorned with real human hair.
Bad news.
The hell, the hell is it with these people and real human hair? Jesus Christ. Have we learned nothing from the last 54 episodes?
Right? It's not something you particularly want to own.
So already a prolific collector, this purchase sparked an interest in what was called primitive art. Okay, the word that was used was primitive art. Nelson's mother, Abby, said that Nelson loves art more than any other man I know. And she had fostered that love and encouraged him to continue to collect and become a patron of the arts. And that's just what he did. The purchase of that knife so fascinated him that he tried to get the trustees of the Museum of Modern Art to include primitive art in their collections. But they didn't agree. And unfortunately, Nelson couldn't convince them. So in 1954, Nelson chartered the Museum of Primitive Art. And in 1957, it opened on West 54th Street, just across from the Museum of Modern Art. He wasn't exactly used to being told no.
Just like, I'll show you, I'll make a bigger and better museum and I'll feature my art in it.
Yeah.
So let me define this primitive art. So this primitive art defined as outside of the sphere of influence of the modern world. And this would include art from tribal societies and items that were at the time only important to them and in their daily life. And that they might have been important to their culture or their spirituality. We would call it indigenous art today. And so, but at the time, we're going to use the word that they used, which was primitive art. So please be aware, we're not being rude. This is how it is said in the story.
Right.
So Nelson at this time was traveling all over the world, collecting these unseen pieces. He was expanding his idea of art from the classical sense and what was being taught in schools. And he had learned to appreciate and see beauty in things that didn't conform to the classical ideas of what art was. And art was truly a passion for Nelson. And it was a love that trickled down to his son, Michael. Now, Michael Clark Rockefeller was born on May 18th of 1938. He was born into arguably the wealthiest family in the world at the time. And in 1938, the family's fortune set right above $900 million.
Jesus.
In today's money, that is roughly 19 billion with a B.
Good God.
So
Damn.
Michael grew up with the best of everything. He attended the Buckley School, which was a private elementary, and then he moved on to attend the Philip Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. And while there, he was a student senator, most likely to please his father, a varsity wrestler, which most likely he enjoyed, and the art director of the yearbook, which was most likely his passion. Now, Michael was 18 on February 20th of 1957, the night that the Museum of Primitive Art opened. And Michael was there, and he saw his father's pride and passion and appreciation for these unique and previously unseen artifacts. There was a paddle from Easter Island, a wooden mask from Nigeria, pre-Columbian Aztec and Mayan stone figures that had come from Mexico. These treasures had come from a world away, each with their own exotic beauty. And Nelson saw it, and so did Michael. His father made Michael a trustee on the board of the Museum of Primitive Art. Now, Michael was described as an intelligent but quiet man with an artistic spirit, and he was very smart. He attended Harvard and graduated cum laude with degrees in history and economics. He also served 6 months in the U.S. Navy, but was given a medical release. He served in the Army, but he got a medical release, which was not uncommon for wealthy families of the time. You go in because you got drafted, but oh, look, you have a medical condition. I guess we're going to have to let you go. Mm-hmm. But Michael was also smart enough to know that his destiny had already been laid out for him, and he was torn. His father expected him to be part of the family business and work somehow in the banking or finance industry and indulge his artistic passion on the side. Rockefellers were expected to make connections with people from other cultures and other areas of the world that were powerful and influential. But Michael was cut from the same cloth as his father and grandfather, just not quite the same pattern. He didn't act like a trust fund brat. He had no desire to be powerful or popular. He had very little interest in business. He was an artist and showed promise and a desire to leave his own mark on the world. And it was about this time that Michael met Robert Gardner. Gardner was over the Harvard Film Study Group and had been commissioned by the Peabody Museum to film a documentary about a previously uncontacted Neolithic tribe in New Guinea in the South Pacific. Now, New Guinea is one of the largest islands in the world, one of the 3 largest islands. And it's believed to be one of the first islands ever inhabited after the land masses of Africa and Eurasia. So the first inhabitants migrated to that island roughly between 50 and 60,000 years ago. The island is covered by 70% rainforests, and it remained virtually untouched and unknown. For the most part, the outside world didn't even know that these tribes existed, and they didn't know that there was any world beyond the borders of the island. And in 1883, the island was invaded by the Dutch, and the Dutch took the west half, and Germany and UK split up the eastern half. The Dutch area is where this tribe that Gardner was going to go and check out lived, and they were called the Donny tribe. The tribe wasn't known until Richard Archibald visited the island in 1938, and he saw the tribe, and he wrote an article about them in 1941 that appeared in National Geographic magazine. And in 1954, now that the Lord was aware that they were there, the Dutch missionaries arrived and established a post in Wamena in the Balian Valley. Go ahead.
No, just with everything that you just rattled off, go ahead and repeat that line like 5 times real fast. Just
what? Now that the Lord was there, now the Lord knew that the tribe was there. He sent the missionaries.
I'm gonna reserve my thoughts for what I really want to say.
Okay. Well, that's all right. So the goal, of course, whenever the missionaries arrived, was to convert the tribesmen to Christianity and to gently steer them away from the practices that the modern world might consider uncomfortable or illicit or taboo, like polygamy or violent warfare or headhunting or cannibalism. Well,
just slip those two in there.
Yeah, nonchalantly just slip those two in there real quick, Shelley.
Yeah. Well, a sin's a sin, right? No matter what it is. So Michael Rockefeller signed on to be the sound technician for Gardner's documentary called Dead Birds. Gardner hoped to catch the violent warfare of the tribe on camera. Gardner had covered all of his bases too. He had gotten permission from Victor de Broom, who was the head of the Native Affairs in Dutch New Guinea. And he got permission to travel freely and film these untouched and uncontacted people. De Broom loved this idea. And the Dutch government actually kicked in $5,000 to help fund the project. Gardner had even obtained permission from The Hague in Holland to go in and study the tribe. He was leaving nothing to chance. So on April 2nd of 1961, the film crew arrived in the Balian Valley and they set up camp. The members were Robert Gardner, who was the director, sound tech Michael Rockefeller, nonfiction author and naturalist Peter Matheson, Life magazine photographer Elliot Elsivan, Elsivan, Elsivan. I knew I was going to mess up his name. And anthropologist Jean Rockhaus. Now, the beauty of these hills and valleys of the island were breathtaking, and Michael was in awe. The group filmed the day-to-day life of the Dani tribe, and in the basin, the tribe grew sweet potatoes and raised pigs, and they had their own language and ceremonies, and they would eat anything that they could catch, except ducks. Ducks were to be avoided, no matter what. The Dani tribe believed that eating a duck could make a man blind to the approaching enemies. And a duck could make you weak to your adversaries because ducks could carry harmful magic fed to them from enemies downstream. So no ducks, people. No ducks.
Don't eat the magic ducks.
No, don't touch the magic duck. That sounds dirty. Anyway. Continuing on.
Stupid autocorrect.
Yeah, I know. So the tribes of New Guinea were allied in small groups, kind of like territorial units. Think of like Tarrant County and Dallas County. They're in alliance against, Parker, Wise, and Jack County. Okay, they have their own little tribal alliances. And however, these alliances were very shaky. They could turn on each other at the drop of a hat for any perceived indiscretion, and sometimes for no reason at all. Now, the Dani tribe was also a very spiritual tribe. They believed in ghosts and in nature spirits. They would fight to avenge the death of a loved one due to the belief that unavenged spirits brought sickness, unhappiness, and disaster. And there was no time limit on vengeance, but it was perceived to be the sooner the better. And even though the group wasn't trying to be intrusive, this group of white people just were.
Mm-hmm.
The villagers would sneak into the camp to see these strangers, and they were just as fascinated by the men as the men were with the tribe. The villagers had never seen things like cameras or steel axes or even canned food or shoelaces. The Dani tribe had no need for clothing. The females covered their lower half with skirts of leaves or grass, and the men utilized a few well-placed gourds. They had done.
Use what you got, I guess.
Yeah.
I think of everything they decide to protect, they decide to protect that. They don't put something over their heart in case they're, they put it over the family jewels. So they
depends on what your belief system is.
I guess so. So they adorned themselves
Cords,
with
nature's codpiece.
cords. It really is. And so, for special events, they would adorn themselves with flowers or dog's teeth or feathers. But that was generally reserved for special ceremonies and occasions or for tribal leaders. And Michael Rockefeller took it all in with wonder. He had never seen or experienced such a raw reality. And Michael became obsessed with taking photographs and pictures of these tribesmen. Sometimes he used up to 18 rolls of film a day.
Wow.
But Michael wouldn't pose the people like the photographer from Life magazine would do. He preferred to sit quietly and snap pictures of the people in their natural state. He wanted to put together a book of photographs when he returned to the U.S. And oftentimes, Michael would get into trouble on the film set because he would be so distracted that he would forget to record the sound. So he'd get chewed out by Gardner, badly sometimes, to the point that Michael would retreat to his tent in tears, promising to do better the next day. And Gardner described Michael as he was young, but he was nice. He was easily distracted, highly disorganized, immature, and a bit spoiled. And Michael obviously wasn't used to being told what to do. And for 6 months, the Donny tribe and the Ballium Valley were documented. And Michael was right there in the middle of it, drinking it in, snapping his photographs, and trading for art. And you see, money didn't mean anything to the Donny tribe or to any of the tribes of Dutch New Guinea. They couldn't eat it, they couldn't build with it, and to them it was of no value. So Michael traded things like fishing line, fish hooks, steel axes, and tobacco sticks, along with pieces of newspaper for the art. Because you see, this was a paperless society. If they got tobacco, they had to have something to roll it up in and smoke it with. So if he traded tobacco, he had to give them a piece of newspaper with it in order for them to be able to smoke it. So he would trade all of these things for the art. And when the production went on a break in May, Michael traveled to the Asmat area in the southwest area of New Guinea for the first time. He had been corresponding with a man named Adrian Gerbrands. Gerbrands was the deputy director of the Dutch National Museum of Ethnology and had been living in the Asmat region doing field work. And he had told Michael about the unique carvings and art of the headhunter tribes that lived in the area. Oh, Michael was intrigued, and he had to see it for himself. Michael had transformed from a clean-cut college boy to a bearded explorer. He contracted a tribal carver to make him a carved boat for the museum and traded for other items along the way. What he found most fascinating were the beach poles. Now, these beach poles were also known as ancestor poles, and they are carved likenesses of ancestors that had passed away. Most were warriors, but when they passed away for whatever cause, any ancestor depicted on the beach pole needed to have their death avenged. Once the ancestor was avenged, the natural balance was restored. And this Asmat tribe was vastly different from the Donny tribe that Michael had been living in among. New Guinea was 10,000, I had to make sure I had that number right, 10,000 miles of swamp and rainforest. It was surrounded by rivers, oceans, trees, and mud. Lots of mud. The mountain ranges reached up to 16,000 feet high. Now, the Donny tribe lived in the basin area, but the Asmat lived in the highlands. Did you have something you want to say, Brian?
Oh no, I was just listening.
Okay.
No, I was listening.
So-
I was just resting my hand on my chin. I was just listening to what you were saying.
I thought you had something you want to say. I was like, oh, do you know something about this area? I don't.
No.
Okay. So while the Donnie tribe were able to raise sweet potatoes and pigs as their main diet, the Asmat people, no such luck. They lived on the pulp of a sago tree and occasionally human flesh.
Again, Shelley,
You know.
just slip it in there. That's fine.
They were cannibals. But they didn't cannibalize for protein. They cannibalized as a sign of respect to a vanquished warrior. So it wasn't like they were just going around eating people. Again, we're going into graphic content warning here. I have done my best to edit out some of the more gruesome details. You can go look those up for yourself. But again, we're going to be going into graphic content here very quickly. So this tribe was known to be cannibalistic, and they had been living the same way that their ancestors did, undisturbed, for thousands of years. And the Asmat people were amazing carvers, and all the men in the village knew how to carve, not with knives. There were no knives. There were no metal. They carved with rocks, these intricate carvings, because, see, they had no tools. So their implements of war were spears, sticks with sharpened rocks on the end. And anything that they had, they carved. And there was a great reverence for these carved items because the Asmat believed that they had descended from the trees, specifically the mangrove tree. The word Asmat translates to mean tree people. So the Asmat origin story goes like this. Phamerapis was the first man on earth, and he spent his days dancing on the beach and existing in solace. But he grew lonely, so he cut down a mangrove tree and carved it into human figures and placed them inside what's known as a U. It's spelled J-E-U, but it's pronounced U, which is a men's ceremonial tribal hut. But the carved figures, as you can imagine, weren't very good company. So he cut down another tree and carved a drum, and he stretched a lizard skin over the hollow center and began to play and sing and chant. And as he played, the wooden figures came to life, and they began to dance. And the Asmat people were born. Strangely enough, a mangrove tree, when the bark is removed, has a deep red color on the inside. And as the sap rises to the surface, it begins to look like little droplets of blood. So these beech poles that the Asmat carved out of mangrove trees, were impressive and sacred. Some reached heights of 20 feet, and they were carved to commemorate the lives of important individuals, usually warriors, and they served as a promise, a sacred promise, that their death would be avenged. And these poles were also used to assist the transport of souls of the dead to the realm of the ancestors. See, the Asmat saw themselves in the tree. And just like a man has arms and legs and a head, so did the sago trees. They had roots and branches and fruit, which was the seed on the top. And just as the fruit of the sago tree nourished new trees, so did the fruit of man nourish other men, specifically the head and the brains. The Asmat lived in a world dominated and controlled by ghosts and spirits. The trees, oceans, rocks, shells, even their own fingers had spirits that resided within them, and every villager could see them and talk to them and communicate with them. Theirs was a world that, well, they believed that there was a kingdom of ancestors across the sea, and it was known as Saffron. And then there was an in-between world, and then there was their world, and all were equally real, and no death just happened. Even if sickness came, it came at the hands of a spirit. And because the spirits of the dead, they were jealous. And they were jealous of the living, and they wanted to stay around and cause mischief. So the Asmat kind of lived in this dualistic world of extremes, life and death, and one balanced out the other. And only through elaborate ceremonies and reciprocal violence could sickness, disaster, and death be kept away. The spirits had to be appeased and chased away and back to the land of saffron beyond the sea. So when the white men came from beyond the sea, the same place that the spirits lived, the Asmat thought that they must be some type of super being. And with the completion of the beige poles, and with the completion of each new beige pole, a new round of raids and violence would begin. The headhunting parties would descend on a tribe that had been responsible for the death or the misfortune, and revenge would be taken. New heads were obtained to balance out what had been lost, and order was restored. The blood of the victims was rubbed onto the beige pole, and the spirit in the pole was made complete and appeased and avenged. The villagers would celebrate, they would sing and dance and have orgies, and then the poles were left to rot in the sago fields to fertilize the new sago trees and complete the circle. How'd you like to live there?
Well, I mean, I was about to say, like as of course, I mean, as you're explaining it, and it's little things that you're slipping in here and there. Of course, we're kind of like, there's shock value to it, but once you actually pay attention, listen, and follow it through to the very end, I mean, it actually makes a lot of sense of why they're doing what they're doing.
It's a legitimate
in this moment.
Life.
Yeah.
It's
pretty interesting.
Here we go again. Graphic content warning. When the Asmat warring parties would return with human heads, there was quite a ceremony involved. It was, by our standards, savage, yes, but it wasn't uncivilized, if that makes sense. Care and reverence were taken in the cleaning and removal of flesh from the bones, and all parts of the fallen victim were used. Bones were turned into daggers, and the flesh was eaten. And when an Asmat warrior, this is the thing I found the most strange, when an Asmat warrior defeated his foe on the battlefield, he would take the name of the defeated man, and he would be known as that name until the next battle and the next person was conquered. What's even stranger is that the family of the victim would call the warrior by the name of the victim as well, and would speak to him and make him part of their family, because he would have had consumed the flesh, and the flesh of the vanquished person made him and the victim one forever.
Look at me. So, I am Ted now.
Well, it's like, I mean, even in being vengeful, there's still a ritual behind it. There's still a reasoning behind it, even in retaliation for someone's death. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, and just as, I mean, he used that warrior to nourish him, and that again completed the circle of life. Now, whenever Michael, go ahead.
No, you're fine.
Whenever Michael traveled here the first time, he didn't go alone. He went with Adrian Gerbrands and Renee Wassing. Wassing was a government anthropologist assigned to him from the Dutch and New Guinea Department of Native Affairs. After all, he was a Rockefeller. I mean, the government wasn't just going to allow him to run around in the wild alone. And from in Michael's field notes, he laid out his objectives, which was he wanted to mount the biggest exhibition of Asmat art ever. And when the film wrapped in September of 1961, Michael returned to New York. But in New York, controversy was brewing. His father was alleged to have been cheating on his mother, and his parents' marriage were on the rocks, and the marriage was just falling apart. Perhaps to remove himself from the drama, in October of 1961, so literally the very next month, Michael returned to New Guinea and to the Asmat region, and he had a new goal. He wanted to assemble and bring a major collection of art to New York, which had never been done before. His father's ambition and his father's passion. He met back up with Renee Wassing, and by all accounts, Michael badgered this Dutch patrol officer into selling him his homemade catamaran. And Michael filled it with a wealth of goods to barter: axes, fishing hooks, line, cloth, tobacco, newspaper, and and by the way, the tobacco, at this point, the Asmat had become addicted to that. And so that was a very highly traded commodity. So he and Renee Wassing set out with 2 Asmat teenagers as their guides to explore the highly inaccessible Asmat region. Michael collected everywhere he went, and in great quantity: bowls, drums, bamboo horns, spears, paddles, shields, and beige poles. In 3 weeks, Michael had visited 13 villages and collected vast amounts of rare and sacred objects. The opinion of the group, however, was that he was becoming a little greedy. And around November the 15th, the party returned to Agates, which is the kind of like the trading port there.
Mhm.
And they returned there because they needed to stock up on supplies so they could continue their journey. And on November the 17th, they set out again for the southern coast of Asmat and intended to travel down the Arafura sea coast and rendezvous with a priest named Cornelius von Kessel. Excuse me, there are a lot of strange names here. I'm doing my best. So they were heading into an area that had remained wild, uncontacted, and untouched. But Van Kessel, he knew the area very well, and he had lived among the people there. And as the catamaran motored down the coastline, the skies suddenly began to darken. And as they began to cross the mouth of the Beach River, the wind picked up and the waves grew into a frenzy. The tide rose quickly and the cross currents became unmanageable for the small boat. The sea that had been gentle just moments ago was now heaving and angry. A wave hit the boat and drowned their outboard motor, leaving them powerless. And the small boat began to drift.
Oh, shit.
Seconds later, another wave that was huge hit the boat, capsizing it and tossing its passengers into the sea. They clung to the overturned boat and finally all managed to climb on top of it. They had to get out of the water because the water around New Guinea was far more dangerous than the storm. The waters around New Guinea are infested with sharks, sea snakes, and both salt and freshwater crocodile.
Lovely.
Yeah, it's like what? Nope.
Now, the Asmat teens, having grown up on that river and in that area, they knew that they had to get to that shore before the boat was carried out to sea. The teens could still see land, and they told Michael and Renee Wassing to stay there and that they would return with help. And with that, the teenagers jumped into the dark water and began to swim for shore. Michael and Wassing spent a very long night clinging to the overturned boat. And just after dawn on November the 19th, Michael began to get worried. What if the boys didn't make it to shore? What if we drift out to sea? Michael, like his father, was always in a hurry. The coastline was quickly shrinking from sight, and he didn't want to wait for help that might never arrive. So Michael decided he was going to swim to shore. He stripped down to his underwear and tied 2 empty gas cans around his waist for buoyancy. He looked at Renee Wassing and with that Rockefeller confidence said, "Think I can make it." And with those final words, Michael jumped into the water to challenge the sea. Renee Wassing watched until Michael's bobbing form disappeared from view. Now, what the men didn't know is that the teens had made it to shore. They had swam and finally made it and reached the coastline. Then they'd slogged through mud, lots and lots of mud, traveled all night, and finally arrived at the outpost in Agate. And they arrived the afternoon of November the 19th, and they summoned help. The Dutch colonial government scrambled ships, planes, and helicopters, and they began to search for the missing men. The Dutch even enlisted the help of local tribes to search. Strangely enough, the only tribe that didn't participate was an Asmat tribe. Now, Wassing was spotted, still clinging to the boat, and rescued late that same afternoon of November the 19th. But Michael was nowhere to be found. Now, word finally, in about 2 to 3 days, reached Nelson Rockefeller that his youngest son was missing. And as the search for Michael spun into high gear, Nelson and Michael's twin sister, Mary, chartered a Boeing 707 and filled it with reporters and set off for New Guinea. They landed in Mararook, which was still about 150 miles southeast of Asmat. But they could do little. There weren't any roads in Asmat. It wasn't like they could land a big plane there.
Right.
So all they could do was wait and update the world in press conferences. Now, on November the 24th, 5 days after Michael went missing, a red gas can was found floating in the sea. The Dutch Minister of the Interior told the New York Times reporter, "There's no longer any hope of finding Michael Rockefeller alive." But the Rockefellers clung to that hope and that idea that Michael just might have made it to shore. A Dutch official supported that hope, telling Nelson and Mary that if Michael reached the shore, that there was a good chance of survival. The natives, although uncivilized, they were kind and they always gave help. The governor of New York waited helplessly for news of his son. With all of his money, sorry, we get talking about missing kids, it bothers me. So even with all of his money and his power and his popularity, he could do nothing but wait. And on November 28th of 1961, 9 days after Michael went missing and he had swum away, his father and his sister flew home. 2 weeks later, the Dutch government called off the search for Michael Rockefeller. Michael Rockefeller's birth announcement had appeared on the front page of the New York Times. That same paper was now reporting the likelihood of his death on the front page. And in 1964, Michael Rockefeller was legally declared dead by drowning. So now we move to the second part of the story. You have to know this in order to understand what happens next. Just a few years before Michael arrived in New Guinea, the villages of Ostajanep and Amadasep engaged in a mutual massacre. They were both powerful villages, each with about 1,000 people each, on parallel rivers and only a short paddle away from each other. But they were enemies. And there had been a war there that had raged for generations. They had been tricking and killing each other for years, but they were also connected. As antagonistic as the Asmat villages can be, they're usually connected by marriage or death. And since the killer of the victims, they took their name and became the same person, that whole thing, remember? And in 1957, one of the Amadasep leaders, convinced 6 men from the village of Ostrigenep to accompany a flotilla of warriors down the coast in pursuit of dog's teeth. Now, dog's teeth were very valuable. They used them as a form of currency, and they were valuable in spiritual rituals and in monetary value to the Asmat. In a true story of treachery, the Amadasep turned on the Ostrigenep warrior, and they killed all 6 of them except for one. And that lone survivor, mangled and bloodied, crawled back through the miles of the jungle, through the mud, to warn his fellow warriors, who then counterattacked. And of the 124 men who set out, only 11 made it home.
Damn.
Now, a murder here or a murder there could be overlooked. But for Max Lepre, the new Dutch government controller in southern Asmat, such mayhem was too much. A man whose family had been colonists in Indonesia for hundreds of years, who had been imprisoned by the Japanese and then Indonesians after World War II, Lepre was an old school colonial administrator determined to teach the Asmat a lesson. On January 18th of 1958, he led a force of officers to Amadasep and confiscated as many of the weapons they could find, and even burned their canoes and burned down one of their ewes. Remember, that ewe is a ceremonial men's hut. It was very sacred. Now, Ostrigenep was not so pliable. 3 Papuan, I believe that's how to say it, policemen sent gifts of a Dutch flag and steel axes, but they were returned quickly. The men of Ostrigenep wanting nothing to do with the government, and they were willing to use violence to make themselves clear. Lepre would write this in his official report. The Dutch flag was not accepted. Well, now, Father Van Kessel traveled by native canoe and decorated himself as the Asmat did, with the cockatoo feathers and the stripes of ash and paint on his face. He had always been well received by the Ostrigenep people. Well, and Lepre, he feared the Asmat. His fear turned out to be self-fulfilling. He headed for that village, armed and reinforced with a police contingent, and he arrived on February 6th in the pelting rain. The clearing was thick with men, but Lepre noted seeing no women, no children, no animals.
Oh.
And as he put it, that was always a bad sign. Now, word traveled fast in the jungle, and the villagers knew what had happened at Amadasep. But they were confused. What to do? So on the left, a group approached, and Lepre believed in capitulation. And on the right stood a group armed with bows and arrows and spears and shields. Lepre looked left, he looked right. He was equally unsure what to do. And behind the houses, a third group of men broke into what was described as a warrior dance. Lepre and a force of police scrambled onto the left bank, and another force took the right. "Come out," Lepre yelled through interpreters. "Put down your weapons." Oh, the men came out of the house all right, with things in their hands, and they ran towards Lepre. In the pandemonium, shots rang out from all directions. The villagers remember every detail of the bullets and the damage that the bullets did. Holes in skulls, going through flesh, jaws being blown off. They had never seen violence so ferocious, so fast, so fierce, and magical. These people were used to hand-to-hand combat and wounding with spears or arrows. They had never heard the sound of a drum and saw a man explode. They panicked and they ran into the jungle. 5 leaders of the tribe were killed that day. And Lepre wrote in his report, "This course of affairs is certainly regrettable, but on the other hand, it has become clear to them that headhunting and cannibalism is not much appreciated by the government institution, but unknown to them, which they only had an incidental contact. It's highly likely that now the people will understand that they better stop and not resist authority. In fact, it was highly unlikely that they had reached such an understanding. For the Asmat, Max Lepre, his raid was shocking and inexplicable. And to them, the cosmos had gone awry. They built their entire lives around appeasing and deceiving and driving away spirits. And yet now this white man, who might even be a spirit himself, had come to kill them for doing what they had always done. The Dutch government, that was a meaningless concept to them. And what of the spirits of the 5 men that Lepre's officers had killed? They were out there wandering around, causing mischief, haunting villages, making people sick. They were as real in death as they were in life. And the world was now out of balance. How to explain it? How do they make it right? And this would have been the world that Michael Rockefeller, had he made it to shore, would have swam up into.
Damn.
He was just kind of screwed, blued, and tattooed any way you looked at it.
That's exactly
Mhm.
right. That's exactly right.
I mean,
I'm moving on. I
Should've just-
promise I'm going to get to the end of this.
should have just waited out in the ocean, for your little
Yeah.
pickup. But you in a
Yeah.
hurry.
He was in a hurry.
Well, I mean, like, you're seeing the shoreline disappear, and you're like, I might actually have a chance if I can swim it. What do you think you're going to do?
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
now
'cause-
Michael was in good shape. He had been an athlete and he'd been living among the people, and
Mhm.
he wasn't out of shape. He potentially could have made it.
That's
So
good.
this is where Milt Macklin enters our story. Milt Macklin was the editor for Argosy magazine, and this was known as a true crime pulp fiction magazine, with pictures drawn in the same manner as comic books. The magazine had done stories on the abominable snowman and the Bermuda Triangle and the disappearance of Michael Rockefeller.
He's our kind of people.
Yes.
Yeah.
This magazine had launched a comic book called The Shadow and The Phantom Detective. And NBC had even turned one of the stories into a TV series called The Court of Last Resort. And in 1968, a man showed up at the offices of the Argosy magazine and insisted on speaking to Milt Macklin. The secretary allowed the man entrance, and a dark and shady-looking character stood before Macklin. Saw the story you wrote on that Rockefeller kid. I have some information that might interest you. Buy me a drink and I'll tell you my story. Well, Macklin was interested. So the 2 men agreed to meet later at a bar called the Blarney Stone. And once the drinks were poured, the mysterious man told his tale. His name was John Donahue. He was a Tasmanian smuggler who ran his operation from Australia to the Trobriand Islands and around Papua New Guinea. Several months ago, what he estimated to be about 10 weeks, he and his associate, Jeffries, had been trading off the coast of northwestern New Guinea in the Trobriand Island group. And they arrived at the island of Kanapura, located 150 minutes east longitude and 8 minutes south latitude. Now, when John came ashore, there were thatched huts and villages, and villagers also roaming about. And out of the corner of his eye, he spots something different. Out of a small hut emerged a sandy-haired white man. He was hobbling badly as if his legs had been broken and maybe had not healed correctly. The man, as John put it, was squinting something awful, as if he had bad eyes. His hair was shaggy, and he had an unkempt reddish blonde beard. The man approached Donahue and extended his hand and said, "I'm Michael Rockefeller. Can you help me?" Well, now the man told Donahue that his catamaran had capsized, so he had swum to shore, and hours later he made it to the beach. and he was rescued by a tribe of Asmat near Ostrigenep. And while they were returning to the village, they were attacked by a raiding party of Trobriand islanders, known as Argonauts of the Western Pacific. He was kidnapped by them and brought back to their home island hundreds of miles to the east in their sail canoes. And because of the way he looked, they called him Big Bottle. And they thought he must possess some sort of magic or sorcery because he came from the land beyond the sea. The villagers thought he had to be important, maybe the son of a great chief or of a deity. And while he had been treated well and with dignity, the villagers had all been kind, except they would not allow him to leave. Donahue said, look, I wanted to help the kid, but it was just too risky. If they considered him a deity and valuable, they would have killed anyone who tried to leave with him in tow. Macklin asked Donahue if he had taken the information to the Rockefeller family, because, if it panned out, he would be due a handsome reward, about $250
Absolutely.
worth. Donahue replied, no, look, I've been a criminal all my life. I'm just trying for once to do the right thing. And besides, I promised the kid. Macklin was speechless. And when both men had finished their drinks, Macklin asked for the tab. But before Macklin even finished paying the bill, John Donahue slipped out of the bar, walked down 3rd Street, and disappeared into the night. Now, Macklin became obsessed with the story. He was known as a no-nonsense guy, but he knew a good story when he heard one. And he checked. There was an island called Cannibals. Macklin decided then and there if Michael Rockefeller was going to be found, then he wanted to be the one to do it. He even took the information to the Rockefeller family, but they declined any involvement, stating that they considered the matter closed. So on February 12th of 1969, Milt Macklin set off on his adventure. And on February 28th of 1969, he arrived in Port Moresby, Australia. He met up with an Australian cinematographer, Jim Anderson. Macklin arrived with 27 pieces of luggage, 2 16-millimeter cameras, and over 10,000 feet of color movie film.
Jesus.
And everything was about 600 pounds overweight. For most vessels, they couldn't even be contracted to use them because they wouldn't carry it.
Right.
But finally, after asking around, they found a man named Tim Ward who agreed to allow his boat to be contracted. And it was a 40-foot lugger called the Beverly Mary. On 3/13/69, Anderson and Macklin went to the Trobriand Islands and landed in Carolina. They met up with Tim and set sail for the island of Cannibals. And on March 20th, 1969, during the voyage, Tim Ward cautioned Macklin, it might be best not to ask about Michael Rockefeller because there's something to that story. So when they docked in Sim Sim, which was a trading post, they were met by a native tribe, and Macklin began to ask his questions. The chief spoke with Macklin after trading some tobacco and the newspaper, and he told him that there were no dim-dim in the area. Now, dim-dim was a word for Europeans. And Macklin felt he might not have been being completely honest with him, that maybe something was being covered up. So the group reloaded the boat, and the next stop was Cannibals. And on March 29th of 1969, they spotted the island. It was 520 yards long with coconut palms and thatched huts. And there appeared to be the remnants of a copper camp, but no visible people, not even footprints, just seaweed and shells were strewn along the beach. Jim Anderson and Macklin carefully searched the huts, but there was no sign of humans. Cannibals was deserted. So on March 24th, the disappointed group returned to Port Moresby. Disappointed but undeterred, they decided to go to the Asmat coast. Small problem. This was under the control of the Indonesian government, and Macklin did not have permission to travel in the area. So a photographer named Malcolm Kirk agreed to take cameras into the region and interview missionaries in the Omadasep and the Ostrigenep people for Macklin, and he would film as much as he could. So Kirk embarked into the jungle. Now, while Macklin and Anderson, they stayed in that area and they filmed a lot of footage and they interviewed a lot of people, as many as they could. And when Kirk finally returned with the sought-after footage, Macklin's bosses were ready for him to come home and come back to work. He had been away for nearly 2 months. So in April of 1969, Macklin packed up the expedition and headed back to New York, unsuccessful in his quest to find the missing Rockefeller. Or so he thought. Milt Macklin never looked at the film footage. It was stored away and eventually given to a film house in England to be used as B-roll footage. Now, Fraser Heston decided that since he had always been fascinated with the Michael Rockefeller story, he wanted to make a movie about it. Now, just so you know, Fraser Heston is the son of Charlton Heston. And fun fact, in the movie The Ten Commandments, Fraser Heston, he was baby Moses, the one they put in the basket and sent down the road. So Fraser Heston, this is where he comes into this story. He too traveled to the Asmat region in New Guinea, and he took hours and hours of film and sound recordings, but he did something a little bit different. He got copies of missionaries' reports that were sent to the Dutch government and that were also in the holdings of the Catholic churches. And they all contained information about the death of Michael Rockefeller. He found the reports made by the Catholic priest, and this is what he learned. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to take a quick sip of my soda pop because we're almost at the end here, guys. We're almost there. In December of 1961, a month after Michael disappeared, a Dutch Catholic priest named Hubris von Piege traveled to Amadasep, which lay in the southern end of his parish. And he had spent years in the Asmat, and he knew the people and the language well. As he sat in a missionary's house in Amadasep, 4 men walked in. 2 were from Ostajanep and 2 were from Amadasep. And they had something they wanted to confess to the priest.
Mm-hmm.
And bit by bit, it spelled out. The day Michael had set off for the catamaran, 50 men from the Ostajanep had brought palm building supplies to the government post. And that was about 20 miles to the south of Ostajanep. They traveled at night and spent the day in the village and left for the long night voyage home. On the dawn of November the 20th, they paused at the mouth of the Etowah River, 3 miles downriver from Ostajanep. They were waiting for the tide to turn so they could safely cross. And they thought that was a good time to smoke and have a bit of sago. And so, as they were relaxing, they see something move in the water. It was a crocodile. Wait, no, it wasn't a crocodile. It was a tuan. And a tuan was the word for white man. He was swimming on his back, and he turned at them and waved. One of the Asmat men said, "People of Ostajanep, you're always talking about headhunting tuans. Well, here is your chance." Then an argument ensued. The Dombai, the leader of the group, now I'm going to mess up these names, so I may just skip them. He didn't think that this tuan, white man, should be killed. But the other 2 thought differently. And they went over to him and they lifted Michael, or who they thought was Michael, into the canoe. One man speared him in the ribs. It wasn't fatal, but they rode to a hidden creek on the Jarwar River where they killed him and made a big fire. Was he wearing glasses? Von Piege asked. What kind of clothes was he wearing? Their answer is burned into his memory. The white man was wearing shorts, but not shorts they'd ever seen before. You couldn't buy them in Asmat. Shorts that ended high up on his legs with no pockets.
Underwear.
Mm-hmm.
Van Piege asked, "Where is his head?" They said, "It hangs in the house of Finn. And it looks so small, like the head of a child." What about his bones? Page asked. He knew that they were used for weapons. One had been made into a dagger, and the others were used as points of fishing spears. Now, one of the men had a thigh bone, and another man had a tibia. And the list went on and on of who had his ribs, who had his forearms, who had his shorts, who had his glasses. The body of this man was allegedly divided up among 15 different men.
Damn.
Why did they kill him? He asked. Because of the killings in Oosterdyp almost 4 years earlier, they said. Because of Lepre. Von Pete felt overwhelmed. The details, especially the description of Michael's underwear, were too concrete not to be credible. And a few days later, he wrote a note to his superiors in agates. And it said, without having the intention of doing so, I stumbled across information that I feel compelled to report. Michael Rockefeller has been picked up and killed by the Oosterdyp. He also notified the regional government controller. Cornelius Van Kessel, the priest Michael had been traveling to meet, had also been hearing the same things. He met with Von Page and sent his Asmat assistant to the village to quiz the warriors there. And on December 15th, he wrote a long report to the controller. And it said, after my conversation with Father Von Page, the 1% of doubt that I had has been taken away by the very detailed data which matched with my data and inspections. It is certain that Michael Rockefeller was murdered and eaten by the Oosterdyp. He wrote that all in capital letters. It was revenge for the shootings 4 years ago. So,
Jesus.
this was then sent on December 21st to the governor of Dutch New Guinea. And it was cabled to the Dutch Minister of the Interior, and the cable was marked secret and then marked destroy. But part of it does remain in the Dutch government archives in The Hague, and it outlines where the two priests and what their report says. It says, in my opinion, some reservations need to be made. No evidence has been found of this, and yet there is no certainty. In this connection, it doesn't seem germane to me to give the information to the press or to Rockefeller Sr. at this time. So they basically decided that they weren't going to tell anyone that the priests had gotten word that Michael had been killed. So, last part of the story. When Heston returned from Oosterdyp and the Asmat region, he began to piece together his documentary. But something was just missing in it. He remembered that Milk Macklin had done a story on the Rockefeller mystery, and he contacted Macklin's widow to ask if he could see the footage and potentially use some of it. So she agreed, but she said he'd have to find it. So he tracked it down, all 10,000 feet of film,
Damn.
Lord.
to a film house in England. And he had it shipped to him, and he began to review it. And the beautiful, wild, raw footage, it just came to life. It had no sound, but the images were magical. Then he came across a shot of a flotilla of Asmat warriors. But something was strange, and it caught his eye. There amongst the rowers was a naked, fair-skinned man with shaggy, sandy blonde hair and a beard. He was part of the group and paddling just like the rest of the Asmat warriors. He had on traditional Asmat war paint on his face, and he was rowing in cadence with the other men. Had Macklin accidentally caught proof that Michael Rockefeller was alive? How could it be? How could it be that this was being seen 39 years later when it was filmed only 8 years after the disappearance of Michael? How did no one ever look at this footage? Had Fraser Heston actually just solved the mystery of the missing Rockefeller? The documentary was released on July 22nd of 2011, and it was entitled The Search for Michael Rockefeller. You can currently watch it on Tubi. And on January 21st, 2014, writer Carl Hoffman's book, Savage Harvest, was released, and it also details the story of his time in the Asmat region and his search to find Michael Rockefeller. So what actually happened to Michael Rockefeller remains a mystery, but theories do abound. One was that he was killed by the cameraman Rene Wassing, cameraman anthropologist. He served a dual purpose. Number 2, Michael drowned. Number 3, Michael had been eaten by sharks or crocodiles. Number 4, he was saved by the tribe of Asmats and assimilated into the tribe. Number 5, he was captured, attacked, and eaten by the Asmat as retribution for the misdeeds of Lepre. But no matter what theory you choose to believe, that cultural curtain makes it certain that we will always be prevented from knowing the truth. But you know what? Just like Milt Macklin, I know a good story when I hear one. And this is a great story.
I agree. And I'm going to go ahead and say that if you look, I did a little something with some of the pictures that you had actually sent over for this. And if you put the film footage next to the picture of Michael Rockefeller side by side, it's
damn close.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
But that's what's frustrating about it, though, is this man. It's just like you had footage and no one bothered to look at it until however many years later, and Michael Rockefeller, if still alive, is scattered to the wind.
At that, yeah, by that point.
Well, now he was 20. Let's see, he was 18, 19. He was 22 in 1961, and it is now the 61st anniversary on November the 19th. It is the 61st anniversary of the disappearance of him going missing. So he could technically be 82 years old. He could still be alive. Remember, his great-grandfather, John D., lived to be 97 years old.
Yeah.
So it's not out of the scope of possibility that Michael Rockefeller right now could be
potentially
alive.
to be alive.
I don't know.
I mean, if you just think about it for just a second with this footage. If you go back and you talk about this area that has been completely void of contact, that has been closed off for however many generations, and then all of a sudden now you have white men coming in, and you have this footage of a white man participating in activities of the tribe. What is the likelihood that that is or is not Michael Rockefeller? It's too coincidental. You know what I mean?
Now,
absolutely.
I will tell you, it is not any of the priests, because this was, again, another rabbit hole I ran down. This is not any of the priests. Now, there were, like von Kessler and von Peach. They both, von Kessler especially, and Gerbrand, they all actually would lived among the people. And von Kessler, he was allowed to wear the tribal paint and the feathers, but he was an older man. He was a good, 10, 12 years older than Michael Rockefeller was. So that could not have been and all of these older priests were accounted for in the United States. They were shown in Fraser Heston's documentary In Search of Michael Rockefeller. Again, you can see that on Tubi. It is fascinating.
Could it be too that once Michael Rockefeller was rescued by the tribe, he didn't want to be found, and he wanted to assimilate and wanted to.
We just had that. Tribe. We just had that be put in the comments. Brittany said, "If he was,
please give us some comments. Tell me what you think."
Well, Brittany said, if he was as enamored with the culture as they say, it could be possible that he wanted to assimilate, which it very well could.
I mean, because you said that he felt like he was almost beholden to his father's legacy.
He was. His life was planned.
And if he wanted to escape all that, and he looked at this as his chance, like, all right, well, I'm friendly enough with these people. Maybe I can live amongst these people and get away from all of that, and no one never needs to find me again.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go right off the grid.
Yeah.
And perhaps, what the thing about this story that actually bothers me a lot is that now I'm sure, being with the amount of the reward that the Rockefellers were offering for Michael to be found, $250,000 at that time, I'm sure they had a lot of crackpots that were saying, "I know where he is," But whenever Milt Macklin, the editor of Argosy magazine, goes to them and says, "I have somebody who says that he's talked to him, that he is on an island. I've looked up that island. It's at the exact coordinates he said." And they said, "We're sorry. We consider the matter closed." Strangely enough, it is documented that reward money for information about the disappearance of Michael Rockefeller was actually paid out to someone by the Rockefeller family. It is documented that it had been paid out. To whom? I could not find. It's just this little footnote in two different places I read that the family had already paid out the reward.
Well, that could be like further lend to the fact that he disappeared on purpose. Maybe someone had the information, came to the Rockefellers and told them, and such a big to-do had been made about everything. They were just like, "We're going to keep this matter private. We're going to close the matter. The media need not know about what we know."
Now,
here's the money.
Coincidentally, after Michael's disappearance and after he was legally declared dead in 1964, in 1970, remember how Nelson had said that he wanted to be president?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he actually was the vice president under Gerald Ford. And he neglected to run for president on the second term. And this was 70. But what bothers me is that for the family to just say we consider the matter closed.
Mm-hmm.
If my child is missing, I am not stopping to find him. There is nothing. There will be nothing that ever stops.
Maybe they knew how to find him and how to contact him if they ever needed to, since they paid the money out to someone. Maybe there was a way they communicated with him still, and like I said, just didn't want to make such a big to-do about it in the media.
I'm going to tell you, this island has they have trails. They don't have roads.
Right.
To the best of my knowledge, if there are cars there now, there weren't cars there then. There was none. Cars didn't exist.
Right.
Remember, there were no nails. There were no hammers. There were no everything. I mean, where they carved things to fit together, to be held together. This was a culture that had no fat in their diet because they ate, the pulp of sago trees, and according to Fraser Heston, he said it tasted quite a bit like cardboard. They sustained themselves on basically tree pulp. They had nothing of the modern world. Do you think they're just going to allow the Rockefeller family just drop by for dinner? No.
I mean, not necessarily for dinner, but I think that maybe, I don't know, if they had contact with like the priests, maybe there was some sort of liaison set up where like.
No, if you go, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Ryan,
okay.
But if you have a mother, and I'm talking about his mother because you had said that he was her favorite. Is that correct?
Nelson was his mother Abby's favorite.
Oh, his mother Abby's favorite.
Yes.
Okay.
Now,
mind.
Now, Nelson, Michael's father, they were pretty close. They both had that love of art. They were both in a hurry, but Michael didn't like the fact that his life was pretty much predetermined. And remember, strangest thing, Nelson Rockefeller believed in fate.
Okay, well, despite what I was words are hard. Despite what I was going to say earlier, I mean, the fact is that you have a child. I don't have children, but I have a lot of people in my life who do have children, and I know how they feel about it. You have a child. That child is your breath. That child is your life. I don't know a parent that is going to stop looking until the moment that they get the answer of, please stop coming to find me. I'm okay, and this is where I want to be. I think
until they die.
Or until they die. I think until a body is found, or until they get word from Michael himself to leave him alone, that this is where he wants to be and he wants nothing to do with his pre-planned life, those parents are not going to stop looking. A mother especially. It's just not going to happen. And so if the money is being paid out, that lends a little bit of credibility that somebody had given them information that led them to him, or to be able to contact him of some sort.
No, I think it led them to a conclusion. I think that whenever that red gas can, they call it a jetty can, but you know, it was a red gas can for all intents and purposes. Whenever that was found floating at sea, now the other one was never found. That's strange to me. The other one was never found. He had been using them for flotation devices. So if one was floating, one wasn't. What could it be?
I mean,
I thought that was odd. But
I mean,
the recovery of that,
shark sees it floating on the water, thinks it's something, goes, it bites it, punches a hole in it, sinks to the bottom.
Potentially.
You know, there you go.
But the fact that gas can was found, that might have been proof enough for them to say, well, who was it that found the gas can? He's obviously drowned. We believe that now. And
it seems like they would, but it seems like they would have made it public at the time who had the information, or you'll be able to find it somewhere. I don't know. It just seems
who it was.
Maybe not necessarily. You got to remember the Rockefellers had money.
Yeah,
they were intensely private, except for Nelson.
And if they came to a conclusion that was not in favorable of the Rockefeller parents, that their son wanted to turn their back on the Rockefeller legacy, any amount of money could be used to shut anybody up about it.
Yeah, they couldn't be known as the family who had some kid who'd gone wild and was running around naked in the jungle and, you know, part of a head hunting clan. They couldn't have that.
And that's another thought about where the information money could have gone to, the tip money could have gone to. It's like, hey, great, thanks. We made contact with him. Now you shut up about this for the rest of your life. Here you go.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
So
perhaps. What do you think happened to him, you guys?
I think he embedded himself with the tribe. I think he wanted nothing to do with his previous life, and that he lived the rest of his days out with the tribe on the island.
I'm gonna have to honestly agree with you, Ryan. I do, and even if the fact that he may still even be alive today, we don't know. I don't know, because I have a hard time believing that two teens. Well, no, I'm not going to say I was a guy. Two teens can make it to shore, but Michael can't, who is an athlete. But then again, they're from the area. They know the waters. They know,
remember,
all this
these
stuff.
Teens, if they want to go somewhere, they had to foot it.
I know.
You know,
that's why I said.
Yeah.
That's why I said no. Never mind. I'm gonna backtrack on that statement.
Here's the difference. Let me tell you something. And I did leave a side story. The teens were alleged to have swam 2 to 3 miles to the shore. Now, by the next morning, when Michael Rockefeller decided to jump in and swim, they had drifted almost 12 miles from the shoreline. Almost 12. They estimated 12 to 15 was how far that they were from that disappearing coastline. Now, with flotation devices and with Michael floating on his back and conserving his energy, could he have made it 15 miles if he was just floating and allowing the current to carry him and only swimming when he needed to? Maybe.
Possibly.
Maybe. It is possible.
I just think the footage speaks for itself.
It's too coincidental that it's only 8 years after his disappearance that they go there, and this is the one and only white man that they see with this tribe.
And this
way
is
too coincidental.
Jim Anderson was filming for Milt Macklin. Now, this Malcolm Kirk guy that actually went into the Asmat region, the footage he came back with really told nothing. But this, you know, they were as close to the Asmat region as they could be without, you know, getting in trouble. And they saw this flotilla of warriors coming down and this man was on it. And it was Fraser Heston that spotted it and was like, whoa, wait.
My question is why did the cameraman never say anything to Milt Macklin about it?
Okay, so if you actually see the footage, that lone fair-skinned person in the middle of this 17 canoe flotilla, they're all paddling, they're all in unison, they're all chanting. You can hear, you know, they are all in unison. There is nothing that sets anyone apart. And And honestly, it's just like they're panning it over it. They're not focusing in on any details.
But-
They're just trying to capture the whole thing.
But well,
Seems
They
Ryan,
like
aren't
he'd
looking
stick
at anything
out.
specific, but they
I-
aren't looking at it. There's 17 to look at. 17 boats filled with men. How are you going to pick out
but at the
one?
but at the same
Go ahead.
time, right? You got to think about where we are with technology. This is not. I'm picking up my phone and
Right.
I'm going to
No.
pan across. I'm going to be able to zoom in and get real close and see detail and all that kind of stuff. But if you're just holding a camera in front of you, you're not really paying attention. You see like some float. You know, this.
Don't
what'd you
leave,
call it?
Brian. Don't get mad.
Don't get mad, right?
No, I was like, sorry. Somebody called me. I was like, stop calling me.
That's okay. But like, what'd you call it, Shelly? A flotilla?
A flotilla. A flotilla.
Yeah, a flotilla of men coming by, and you have a camera at chest level, and you're just panning for panoramic views or
You're
something
looking
like
at
that.
the pageantry.
And you're doing along with the camera, but
Mhm.
then like you're like, oh, what's that over there? As the camera still pans, you know. I mean, you gotta kind of look at what was the cameraman doing at the time. He may not have been paying attention where he's like, oh, there's
He could've
a
been
lone
talking
white
to
man
Macklin,
standing
like,
over there.
"Holy
At the
cow,
same
look at
time,
this."
Yeah.
though. At the same
Ryan,
time,
I'm going to
though.
tell you, before you start to say this, whatever you're going to say, you have to go and watch it. It
Mhm.
is fast, and it is in like less than, you see him in less than, I think it is 0.6 of a second in the frame.
Oh wow.
I mean, it just literally pans past him.
I know, but the thing is I feel like, you know, even if you are just like getting B-roll, like you can see your subject, and even if you are just kind of panning by, this guy would stick out like a sore thumb.
But
Not
whenever you go
necessarily.
and
Look at-
watch it,
no, but
he
look at this camera.
doesn't.
Look, I mean, this is the kind of camera
That's
that we're
Jim
talking
Anderson.
Yeah, I
about.
know. I'm saying, but stuff a viewfinder you're looking through.
But it's not. I think you're thinking that there is like this screen.
Yeah,
that this
No,
no,
man
not
is
at
gonna be
all.
able to
No,
see.
I know he's.
But
I know
even
he's
if you're like doing like
Yeah.
this, you know, I mean, and you're looking down. I mean, you're just if you're panning that fast, he's only on the screen for 0.6 of a second. You're just gonna be, oh, cool, flotilla of men. Okay, great. There's a mountain. There's a tree. There's a stream.
And that was
Oh,
what
look,
it was.
there's
It was a quick
17
pan
men.
across the flotilla. That's
Yeah.
what it
Man,
was a
I-
quick pan across it.
I mean,
Ryan,
even
go
with
and
just
watch
panning,
it. I know you can say, go and watch it though. Go and watch it.
I'm just
It
saying,
is
even with
fast.
just panning fast, it just seems like, you know, you have in your
He's
mind,
not
I'm
as
looking.
obvious as you think.
I know.
I like how
I'm saying-
this is what we're arguing tonight or debating, guys. This right here is what we're debating.
But what I'm saying is, like, in your mind, you know, hey, I am looking for this white man in a region where there are no white men.
But they weren't looking for a white
But
man at that time.
They were going into
who
to
are-
that. They were going into to do the Asmat region at the time. And if you're not, if Ryan, you don't know what the cameraman's doing at that time. I mean,
Hold
he
on.
could just.
Was the cameraman not tasked with going to the Asmat region to see
Okay,
if he
this
could?
is not Malcolm Kirk's video. This is Jim Anderson's video. Jim Anderson and Milt Macklin stayed together, and they stayed as close to the edge of the Asmat region.
That's what I'm talking about. Were they not tasked with going to the island to see if they could find Rockefeller? Was that not
That was
their
Macklin's-
entire mission?
That was Macklin's objective whenever he went.
That was their video footage, correct?
Yes, but they were filming everything.
Okay.
Because
And
they
that's what I'm
planned on making
saying.
something with it.
It just seems like if that you're in your mind, you're like, okay, I know what I'm looking for. That would just stick out. I don't know. To me, it just seems like maybe I'm more detail oriented, but it seems to me like it would just stick out to me.
Again, I'm going to go tell you to watch it, and I guarantee you, the first time you watch it through, you won't spot him.
Ain't not a one of us more detail oriented. How many times have we forgotten to take location photos? How many times have we forgotten to press record? How many times have we missed something in the moment because we're talking to each other?
You can find this
True,
video anywhere
but-
on the internet. Search film footage of Michael Rockefeller, Asmat, warrior, whatever.
Great point from
or
Brittany in the
go-
comments. Sorry.
Go ahead.
She just said 8 years would be enough time to get attuned into the tribe enough with the sync pageantry, and he is perfectly synced. There wouldn't be much of a reason for him to catch our eye in bright sunlight.
So if you want to see this,
And if it's moving fast.
go to Tubi. Go to Tubi and watch Fraser Heston's video documentary, The Search for Michael Rockefeller. It has all of Milt Macklin's footage in it, including that quick flash of the flotilla that he spots Michael Rockefeller in,
And then
or
you
who is alleged to be Michael Rockefeller.
and then you too can debate the cinematographer instead if Michael Rockefeller is alive or not.
Well, gentlemen, any final thoughts? We all believe, or you both believe, that he made it to shore and he assimilated.
I absolutely 100%.
There's not enough there for me to have any other conclusion. There's too much
Yeah,
coincidences going on in the area.
So I will tell you that I too believe that he made it ashore and that he assimilated, but not because he was running from his life. I think, his life back in New York. I think that he didn't have a choice. I think that he was seen as valuable and a deity and some kind of supernatural being from across the sea. I think that he assimilated because he had to. And I think that's why there was no further contact ever made or attempt to be made. I think Donahue's story may actually have been true. I think he was just in the wrong location. So,
and mark that in your journals, viewers and listeners. November 15th, Ryan, Shelley, and Blake, all three agreed to the exact same conclusion for the first time on this.
No, we've agreed one other time. It's rare, though.
We have. It's very, very rare.
So, Blake, why don't you tell them everything that they need to know?
Well, whatever social media channel you're watching us on tonight or listening to us on, we are not only on those social media channels. Make sure you go follow across the board. We are on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, and about 19 other podcast locations. So wherever you get your podcasts, we are in those locations. Make sure you go and follow us. We have some exclusive content coming out exclusively for certain social media channels. You're not going to get it on just one channel. So search everything Vaguely Paranormal and look for the green sound wave. Shelley?
And if you really want to know what we really talk about when we're not on the show, because honey, on here we behave. Go become a Patreon member. It's $5 a month. You get everything. We don't have tiers, 5, 10, 15. No, $5 a month. You get everything. You get all the pre-broadcast. You get all the broadcast. You get all of the Patreon exclusive content, such as our Paracon videos and the all new post broadcast, which again, I am very highly against. If you have not gone back and watched last week's post broadcast, child, you are missing out. I'm not even going to go into it. But also for Patreon members, and guys, we were supposed to draw tonight. That's okay.
We have a post podcast.
Oh, that's right. If you are a member of Patreon, you will get entered into a drawing to become to get on an exclusive broadcast with us, where you can ask us anything. Now, if you are selected, you will go into a secondary drawing to come with us to a location and investigate, which will just be us and Patreon members that have won. And the only thing you got to pay for is your way there. The location will be paid for. And anyway, I think that you'll really like it. So go and become a Patreon member, $5 a month. What else I need to know, Ryan?
So anywhere you get your fine podcast, please go like, subscribe, and comment. Also go on YouTube, hit the little bell button. So you'll go anytime. But sorry, words are hard. They escape me. Anytime you go to YouTube or we post anything on YouTube, you'll get that notification. Also, tell 2 friends about us. Have them tell 2 friends about us. Spread the word, because the more you spread the word, the more we can do for you guys and the more we can bring you guys. Also, as part of the post-broadcast and pre-broadcast, we're now doing what's called 2 Question Tuesday. We will ask any question that you send in. We discuss it as best and answer it as best as we possibly can. And you can send your questions to where, Blake?
That is the evppod@gmail.com, THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Like, share, and subscribe.
Or message us on any of our social media accounts.
That's right. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I hope that you really enjoyed the story of Michael Rockefeller. Please go and search it out. It is fascinating, and you will really like doing the research yourself. So for my friends, Mr. Blake Smith and Mr. Ryan Roberts, I'm Shelley Pruitt. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Everything Vaguely Paranormal. And as always, we will see you next